In today's new episode, we speak about the mysterious abduction of Nancy Guthrie from her home near Tucson, Arizona on the evening of January 31st, 2026. And today, Lance, we're speaking with former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, and this is a really great conversation. What'd you make of this?
Well, it's always great to have Jennifer back on the show. She comes with years, decades of experience in law enforcement, including the FBI. She has handled pretty much anything that is crime-related in such a manner that you can't help but know you're walking away from a conversation with her with more info, and you've learned more about the situation than you had when you went into it. I think that is what I'm taking from this conversation. You did mention when Nancy Guthrie was abducted, and that was at the end of January. We're coming to the end of March now, and I don't think anybody here thought, including Jennifer, initially, like she even makes a comment that they thought this was going to be wrapped up within the few hours that Nancy went missing. She was supposed to go on to talk about it, and they said, well, just get prepared, you might not be coming on. I don't think anybody would have thought 2 months later that we're talking about this with very, very, very little more information to go on. So super excited to bring her on, because we're at that point now where we need somebody of her stature to give us information that we just don't have at hand, not being connected to law enforcement.
Right, and she does introduce a few new details to us that, are new to us as far as our coverage goes. So Jennifer Coffindaffer has her own podcast. It's called Break the Case with Jen Coffindaffer. You can find that on YouTube or Apple or Spotify, and we'll throw some links in the show notes.
You have to listen to this entire episode because we get into this other crime that happened an hour and a half away from Nancy's disappearance, Nancy's abduction. And the details of that have some eerie hallmarks that I don't want to say are related to Nancy's disappearance, but Jennifer brings this crime up because there's too many coincidences in the timing and the proximity to just ignore it.
Okay, so let us know what you think on YouTube or Spotify, and please follow us on social media. Thank you very much for listening. We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back with Jen Coffindaffer. Welcome back to the podcast, Jennifer Coffindaffer. Jennifer, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks a lot for joining us. Before we get started speaking about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, I just wanted to ask you about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was with the FBI for 25 years as a special agent. And specifically, my areas were violent crime, organized crime, gang investigations. I also worked in what we call resident agencies, which are not the main offices, but actually the resident offices outside the main offices, which means anything and everything that came in, we handled. As opposed to when you're in a main office, you are on a specialized squad and you stick with those violations. When I was in a big office, which was Houston, I specialized in organized crime. And so that's my area of expertise. I was also for 15 years on the FBI SWAT team stationed in both Dallas, Houston, and San Juan. And I was also a firearms instructor for over 20 years with the FBI.
Very impressive. And what are you up to now?
I'm wearing a lot of hats now. I have my own company called Firearms Beyond International. No, we are not arms dealers. People see that name. And I teach firearms and marksmanship and also self-defense, but I do it very selectively now. I also am the News Nation law and justice contributor. And so I'm on News Nation often talking about these cases and providing at least my point of view regarding several of these cases. In addition, and mostly what I do is I'm an expert witness, and I work on cases throughout the country for attorney's office, but mainly for the United States Attorney's Office throughout the United States on different cases involving homicides and use of force type investigations. And then, of course, I have my own podcast, Break the Case with Jen Coffindaffer, which I hope some of you might want to tune into.
Oh, I definitely think our listeners would appreciate your coverage of this case and others on your podcast. So definitely check it out. Now, have you seen cases like this? Like, I guess I'm trying to get a grasp on how rare a home invasion abduction like Nancy Guthrie's is. Have you ever worked on cases like this? Or I guess, how rare is this situation?
This is as rare as it gets, basically, not because of the abduction portion. For instance, in gang investigations and organized crime and cartel cases, this happens quite often. If you work cases over the border, south of the border, this happens all the time. This is part of what the cartels do to make money. They abduct people, particularly American citizens, but others as well, that they believe they can get money for. And they actually do it the right way, if you can consider kidnapping the right way. But they kidnap, they quickly ask for money. Once they get the money, they turn over the victim. So that's the only way to keep a business viable, right? If you give me this, I will give you that. And they keep that pro quo alive and well. And that's how they're able to make money. But why it is so rare is seeing that here in the United States. In other words, a purported complete stranger who has chosen to victimize an 84-year-old woman. It's so very rare. I did find a case in South Carolina that actually just occurred very recently, where an 80-year-old woman was abducted from her home. It was essentially a robber who was trying to rob her of her vehicle after another vehicle he stole broke down. He went in and went to steal her vehicle. He came in contact with her. He kept her for over an hour in the house. He stayed there, ate pizza, hung out for about an hour, and then left with her, ultimately crossing state lines to North Carolina, murdering her by shooting her in the head. But in that situation, he was fully identified. In other words, he wasn't in a mask. This wasn't in the middle of the night. It was in the day. So a lot of differences, but that's just to tell you how rare an 80-year-old, I mean, it's not even on statistics because it's this rare.
I appreciate your coverage of this case. You recently hosted an expert panel that was very informative, very interesting to hear all kinds of perspectives, professional perspectives on this case. Couple of things really jumped out to me. One perspective, I believe it was from the Los Angeles County District Attorney, and his name escapes me, but he theorized that the abductor always intended to kill Nancy and wasn't really looking for the ransom. I guess, can you walk us through that? I know it's someone else's perspective, but I think you certainly understand where he's coming from with that. And the follow-up point being how difficult it is to conduct a successful ransom attempt.
Two great questions. First of all, that was Philip Dubé, and Philip Dubé served decades both as a prosecutor in the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, in conjunction with, and mostly as a public defender in the Los Angeles office. So you can imagine the breadth of violent crime cases that he actually had on his desk, that he actually litigated. It was huge. So he has seen it all. And I wanted to get him on for two reasons. One, so many people talk to the detectives and the agents, but when you look at this, you also have to consider every step you take as an agent. You're trying to keep in mind that someday you're going to be on the stand to defend yourself against every step and every decision you made. So I loved having him on. Actually, it caught me off guard. If you heard me in that, I said, whoa, Philip, where do you get that from? So his belief is that somebody went in with a sharp-edged or knife-type object purposefully to take Nancy Guthrie's life. He murdered her there and then took her to take, of course, the evidence out with him and discard her. And I said, well, what makes you think a knife? And he said, basically from past cases, from things where he's seen that blood dripping, the droplets coming out. That's what he believes. And everybody, of course, has a different opinion based on their experience combined with the facts. And he was pretty emphatic about it. And that's what he believes happened. He doesn't think that they ever wanted money. He really thinks this was targeted for committing this horrible violent act.
So if this was intended to be murder from the onset, where is the proof of the result of that murder? If this was supposed to be something that is made to be taken seriously beyond a ransom, where's the point of it all? I guess I'm asking.
Yeah. So first of all, this is not my perspective.
Right.
It's somebody that I very much though respect, and they could be right. I think there's also some proof in the pudding with this because when you look, she's gone. I mean, so far we're on day, please help me out. I want to say day 54 now.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And she's not been seen or heard from. So I think it is a very likely conclusion that she's no longer with us. Although I'm a glass half full, I always hold out just the littlest bit of hope. But nevertheless, so his belief holds out some bit of, I think, support with that she is gone and that's what meant to have happened. What would be the purpose is your question, though, I think. And I think the point of the purpose of it would be to literally hurt this woman that for whatever reason there was a vendetta against or something against Nancy or something against Annie or Tommaso or Savannah or her husband in some way. To just say it's definitely Savannah because she's rich and a celebrity, it could be somebody else. It takes very little, and that was his point. It could be anything. It could be snubbed at the grocery store. He's seen it all. Many of us have seen cases like that. You can say the littlest thing to somebody who has a murderous intent, and all of a sudden you could find something like this happen to you.
Now, you have mentioned on your podcast how you believe there was more than one abductor. Could you explain that idea a little bit?
Well, I think it goes against what most of my cohorts would say because a couple of reasons. One, we've only seen one abductor on camera, I believe, whether you're counting the January 11th appearance and this appearance, it appears to be only one person. Secondarily, there seems to be only that at least is documented one entry point and one extra exit point. Possibly. I don't really buy that. But nevertheless, there's a couple reasons. First of all, I don't believe that the vehicle that was used to transport Nancy just sat around there for 40 plus minutes. I just don't. I don't think that it makes sense to put a beacon on that location, even though it was pitch black out. There was a full moon, which affects a neighborhood with zero lighting enormously. I've lived in a neighborhood, Westlake, Texas, like that, and any amount of light is amazing because there's no light. And so the full moon nights, you could see everything outside. It was like a flashlight. So nevertheless, I believe that he came to the door, a porch guy, and that his mission was to disable the camera so that when he called to have that driver come around with the car, they could make their most expeditious exit. And again, my hypotheses are based on the facts known and from the breadth of experience I have with cases. And Occam's razor, which is the simplest solution, is typically the solution. When you start getting out there with this has to happen and this has to happen and this has to happen to make this happen, you're usually going way astray. So it doesn't make sense that you would park a car out there for well over 40 minutes. It makes a lot of sense. And I still believe it was an epiphany moment for me to see what I believe is an antenna of a walkie-talkie, AKA a two-way radio sticking out of his pocket. He does not need to have that unless he needs to communicate. You combine that with the fact that I believe if there was successful geofencing in this case, we would already have a perpetrator identified. It would not take all of this time. Nancy Woodrum, who was a 60-year-old who was sexually assaulted by a construction worker that worked in her house in California, but he went in again drunk, unmasked. He murdered her right there, took her to another place to bury her. My point is that isn't even a good parallel case, in my opinion. because, again, it was somebody she knew and somebody unmasked. So I think it was, in other words, that's a case of a single perpetrator. That case makes a lot of sense to me. This, he tries the doorknob. He seems to be knocking. You can see his right hand knocking as his left hand is trying the door, as if somebody could possibly be in there. He takes the vines and kind of holds it up there, which is also very bizarre. He takes all the time in the world as if somebody's got his six, somebody's got his back. I just think, and this is only based on, or in part based on my experience, I don't know of one case of an abduction where there's not more than one person involved.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program. And you did mention Occam's razor, and traditionally that is something that I do lean towards as well, which is like, stop trying to figure out everything else that could have happened in order to make your theory work, because you're sort of trying to fit these square pieces in round holes and prove negatives, and that becomes a frustrating process. But as an investigator, when does that stop? Because we just said like how long she's been gone for without a trace. So at some point, don't you have to say like, okay, maybe we have to start shifting from the Occam's razor and say maybe some of these factors did play into a successful kidnapping or a successful crime?
Well, there's certainly about 10% of me that has totally been outside of the box. And that 10% outside of the box is that truly this was a vicious, evil, personal crime committed against Nancy due to Savannah's celebrity. And I take that as somebody who is a Alan Hinckley sort, to get her attention, to be in charge, to have the whole world right now over the last 6 weeks looking at him. He has a spotlight right now. Every time any show is done, the news talks about him, he is squarely in the spotlight. And that might be something he's really enjoying. And so could that be it? Remember, it's quirky to me. There's a couple of reasons that this will always bother me. And one thing is Savannah wrote that book. And in that book, she has a chapter about how they kidnapped each other and how Nancy was involved in the kidnappings and all of that. That's just a very quirky, weird coincidence. So it makes you wonder, did the person who did this study her? Did they know this about her? I truly believe no matter how this works out, whether it was a planned abduction for ransom that went south when she died, which is my Occam's razor belief, or whether it's way more sinister than that, and somebody who really has a serious screw loose, that no matter what that is, that somebody involved in this knew her and had personal knowledge of her place and things like that's gleaned somehow.
Now, how long was the abductor actually inside Nancy's house? And I guess more importantly, is that a clue?
So I am not sure, but very recently I had a discussion with really the founder of genetic genealogy. People don't talk about her a lot because she's actually still a scientist and still working on cases. She was the one that made the first genealogy case using genetic genealogy to solve a case, actually. Her name is Dr. Fitzpatrick, and she is something else, like her background and her education. But we were cutting this up yesterday just personally, and she really brought up some points that I really am taking to hard consideration. There's been a lot of things that never seemed right about that timeline. In other words, I felt that timeline is very nebulous to say that at 1:47 when the camera disconnects compared to 2:12 when a person is seen again by her cameras, compared to, again, 2:28 disconnect of the Apple Watch to the pacemaker. That timing was just disjointed to me. And take this possibility, this hypothesis. If you look at his actions on the porch, I call him Porch Guy. If you look at Porch Guy, he is literally acting like he's at a flea market. I mean, he doesn't have a care in the world. He's sort of wandering around. There's nothing urgent. He's not breaking glass. He's just a walk in the park for him. It's the bizarrest behavior. Why do we think that somehow in 40 minutes that he was even in that house? I mean, why do we really think that? As lackadaisical as he was, we don't know how long it took him to even disconnect the camera. Let's just say, for those of you who work and do things around the house, I love to do that, but they always take me 20 times longer than I ever think they're going to. Oh, I can do that. And then, I got the cuffs up, and 30 minutes later, I've barely started the project, right? How long did it take him to do that? Was he the one seen at 2:12 again on the camera? Now we have 2:12 and we have entry sometime after 2:12 and then 2:28 for him to go out. That's not very long. That's 16 minutes to get in. What about that back door? There's new source information that back door was often kept open. I wouldn't doubt that at all. She lived there since 1975, I believe, if I recall correctly. Bought that house for only $89,000. She's lived there forever. She probably had so much trust. She's on almost an acre of land, never, as far as we know, had any issues before. How many people keep their back door unlocked? Or maybe just that key lock. Look, we know a locksmith went out there. We know that. We've got them going out there. There's footage. We've got the fan. Did they go back out there to fix a lock that had been jimmied with? Or did they add a deadbolt lock? Because it's so easy to get one of those turn locks. I mean, I can open those in like 30 seconds without any specialized FBI tools. Once you learn how to do it, it's very, very simple. So did they do that, or did she make the mistake and leave it open? Did he know it would be open? Did he know she kept that door open? I think he came in, whether it was him or an accomplice, I think they went in through the back, and I think the time in the house may have been a lot less than people have thought. Particularly, I want to give credit where it's due, and that is in large part to this really amazing discussion I had just yesterday with Dr. Fitzpatrick when we were cutting all of this up and looking at the time. So I'm really leaning toward that.
Can you remind us when they had a locksmith?
I don't have that exact date in mind. I've posted a lot about it. I've got the film footage. I've got the van where you could take the license plate from the van and it goes back to the locksmith, and you could see them back there working on it. That date, if you want to look for it, is going to be just days before they installed the new security system. So you're going to see a security guy out there putting signs in the yard saying, the new security company. And it was right before that the locksmith showed up. And that's, again, just supported the fact that entry was really made from the back. Plus, there's absolutely no sign of forced entry from the front. And that door would have been very difficult to penetrate without any signs of being, tampered with. So I never, ever believed that they entered through the front. I think they entered through the back and then brought her out through the front with a vehicle that came over and wished her away.
Do you think that the addition of the security and the new lock, was that motivated by something? Was there some sort of factor that happened that they were like, we need to increase the safety here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the situation, and this isn't victim shaming at all, she had no subscription. I have a subscription. It's $3.15 a month, I think. That's how little it is. So this wasn't about money. This was just about her not thinking she needed it. I don't need that. I'm not in danger. And, this should be such a huge lesson for all of us with family that are elderly, and for every elderly person, that you have to have a security system. She had no security system. She had no subscription. So in other words, things just record for her to see, right? That's why she got the cameras. She got it so she could watch wildlife and things, is my understanding. I've even seen a clip of some of the wildlife she, watched and recorded, which is kind of cool. But that was her reasons for this. It wasn't out of worry. And how many are lax? I can tell you, my mom, she's actually my stepmom, but has been my mom for about 50 years. She never locks her doors. No way. They're all 100% open, but she has huge, gigantic, really vicious German shepherds. So nobody would be stupid enough to get near that house.
If I'm not mistaken, I was just looking up the date there of the locksmith. It seemed to come after Nancy was abducted.
Oh, yeah. All of this that I'm talking about is after the abduction and before really the family took back sort of ownership, right? The Pima County folks left. They had a security company come in and put in a new security system and put signs everywhere. Then they also had no trespassing signs put up. And then before they did those two things, they had a locksmith go in and you can see him working in the back part of the house. And so there's no doubt whether it was to fix the lock, whether it was to make that lock stronger, like add a deadbolt, but there was some work done on that back door and nothing done on the front door, which makes me believe entry was from the back.
Okay, so the locksmith came after Nancy's abduction.
Oh, yeah.
So what would the process be for the locksmith company to enter that property to alter something that might be a significant clue? You know what I mean? Like, did they have to get clearance from law enforcement, or was it simply the family contracting out a locksmith to do it?
Well, and to your point here, look, the crime scene was released on day 2. That crime scene, anything after day 2 is ruined. So the FBI comes in, I believe, on day 4 and does their evidence response team search. Then they go back again a couple of days later because they realized we should have taken the car because there could be all sorts of information in that vehicle. And they took the other 2 cameras on the roof. Then they went back again for a force search and searched the septic tank. To be clear, first of all, the family was in charge of that home after it was cleared from Pima County, so they could do whatever they wanted. Do I think that they coordinated with Pima County and or the FBI? Absolutely, to make sure that it would be okay. But at the end of the day, that crime scene was done after the first 20 hours in terms of adjudication, in my opinion. I mean, all sorts of trouble after that.
Okay, so could it be that the lock that was the original lock was taken by law enforcement as evidence and they needed to put a new one on?
Well, they didn't take the front doormat. That porch guy
It's
was
true.
sitting there with a flashlight in his mouth, which, put a banana in your mouth for several minutes and see how much you salivate.
I have tried to do that thing with a flashlight in my mouth and just like as I'm doing some work somewhere, and within seconds, I'm drooling. This is not something that when you see in movies, it's so clean and and easy. You can't do that without something happening within less than a minute.
Some people gag. Like they can't have anything that touches beyond the midpoint of their tongue. Just makes them gag. Obviously, that wasn't a problem for this guy, but literally he's standing over that mat with this flashlight in. He had to touch the flashlight both to put it in and to take it out. So I think DNA would have gotten on the outside of those gloves. Everybody said, oh, he's gloved. There's no way. No. There should have been saliva on those gloves, and that could have been easily transferred into that house. Maybe that's part of what they have in terms of their DNA sample. But I'm just saying, they didn't take the mat. They didn't take the vines. Can you imagine if there was a micro tear? When you watch him, he's pulling. It's not like he picks a flower. He's literally like over there messing around pulling. What if there was a micro tear in that glove? We don't know. I'm just saying, and Dale Lundberg, who he and I worked a homicide together in Dallas, I absolutely think the world of him. He probably has the most experience of most of the people around in terms of the numbers of homicides he's worked and been involved with, and robberies and kidnappings, because before he worked homicide, he worked robbery kidnappings. And I always say you'd rather be lucky than good as law enforcement because you just need that lucky break. And he would always say, and God intervened. So when you think the case is done, there's nothing else you can do. You get that person that walks in and says, I think I might have something for you.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Now, speaking of the video footage and sort of the behavior of that the porch guy, Is it your belief that what we've seen as civilians just being posted was taken on 2 different days? You mentioned January 11th, and there are some differences. I've looked at these photos and this video footage as well. There are some differences in what the porch guy appears to be wearing. So yeah, is that your opinion that was some of that is taken from a separate date?
Yeah, when I first heard source reporting, I'm always hesitant. Because of 2 reasons, and it has nothing to do with the reporters, because that's their job. They're supposed to be probing and trying to figure it out. I always have hesitation because an individual who is in law enforcement, if that's the source, why? Are you getting paid? Why are you literally turning your back on your oath? Why are you risking your job so you can provide inside information to a reporter? It's just mind-blowing to me. But it's obvious that maybe it isn't one of them. It could be their hairdresser. It could be their mom. It could be their sister that overhears these conversations, and they're the ones. It could be 2 or 3 steps removed, which then is a big problem too. Because I say something like, my wife, I'm talking to my wife, and I say something to the degree that, we're trying to look and see if any family are involved. And we're looking at Annie, we're looking at Tommaso, and we're looking at blah, blah, blah. And we've cleared all of them, but we're still working on Tommaso. And then that gets down to woman telling her hairdresser, and then hairdresser telling somebody else, who then goes to the media and says, boy, do I have some scoop for you. And that turns into Tommaso is our prime target.
Right. Or I was even thinking about like somebody listening to this episode and saying that you came on and you said that there was DNA evidence on the front mat and they never took it. When they hear that comment sort of like out of context, when you're saying, well, what if, I totally understand what you're saying. So yeah, it is a dangerous sort of reckless game of telephone there.
But in this case, we have support. We've had support for a while, and it just keeps getting stronger that it's the 11th. First of all, when you look at the lighting, the backlighting conditions, and I pointed this out from the minute that source reporting was done, a waning crescent on January 11th, much less moonlight on the day of the abduction, full moon, full on moon. The other thing is shoes are different, the shirt is different, obviously no holster and no gun, and obviously no backpack. When you add all of that together, but now the reason that an exclamation point is put on this are 2 factors. First of all, Savannah Guthrie, the Guthrie family came out and they said, listen, the 11th is important. That was in their statement. Please, Tucsonians, we need you to look at the 11th, the night of the 31st, and the morning of the 1st. And I think that night of the 31st, everybody's kind of skipping over that. I wouldn't skip over that because that tells me maybe he was there the night of the 31st, because the night of the 31st has nothing to do with the morning of the 1st. Then secondarily to that, now, and this is just, so it's a done deal, Nanos, who's representing law, and I know he's been all over, but Nanos said on March 23rd, I believe it was, on March 23rd, he said, yes, the 11th's important. So he's come and supported it. So pretty much we know now when you add all those factors together. I'm just always hesitant when I first hear source reporting, even if it can be the best reporter out there. And I know it was multiple reporters that were reporting this. It's, again, nothing against the reporters. It's just I explained my problem with sources.
Now, you have spoken about on your podcast this sister case that happened in Scottsdale where 2 California teens were apparently involved in some kind of cryptocurrency scheme, and they later claimed that they were being extorted. So I guess, can you tell us about this case and how you think it could be connected to Nancy Guthrie's?
I am so glad you brought this case up. It's something I've been talking about, and I tell you, the print, I think the Post did something on it for sure. Newsweek did something on it. We were supposed to do something on it actually last night at News Nation, but one of the other segments ran over, and hopefully I'll be on soon about it. But essentially you have, I mean, statistically, this just as an investigator, it blows all your statistics. You asked me, your first question was, how rare are these cases? Well, now we've got two that happen one day apart, 1.5 hours apart. As an investigator, I'm paying attention. I mean, I'm putting members of my squad on this to investigate, probably 2 or 3, and saying, go out to California, go get this rundown, figure out who Red is, figure out who 8 is. But essentially, these two kids drive 6.5 hours to perpetrate a crime, to kidnap these two individuals. All right. And the two individuals have money. It's in a beautiful neighborhood. And they break into the house and they kidnap. I mean, they've been charged with kidnapping. They didn't take them out of the home, but you don't have to be taken out of the home to be kidnapped. They tie him up, they beat him. They asked for around $60 million in Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. When they say they can't do it, they beat them some more. Thankfully, there was a family member who was actually, this is how big this house was, in another part of the house that was unbeknownst to these guys because they were idiots. And they did this in the middle of the day in a car that was easy to identify. And he called 911 silently. And police came, they chased him, got in this police chase, they arrested him. These two had never met each other. These two don't know who the person extorting them was. They received $1,000 in seed money to buy uniforms, to dress alike, to pay their expenses to go there, of course, in hopes of, I'm sure, getting a piece of this pie. Idiots, right? And this happened the day before Nancy was hit. It's not about them. It's about Red and 8, who are the two individuals that they were communicating with on the Signal app. Now, you might ask, Jen, how did they come to meet them on the internet, right? That's what they're saying, the internet. This, to me, is clear dark web stuff. Dark web, you can literally watch somebody murdered on the dark web. You can contract murder for hires. You can do about anything you want to do in certain places. I don't know if that's where they're going to trace it to, but I think it's possible. Is there some wackadoodle out there that is precisely pinpointing high value targets for these ransoms, kidnap for ransom type cases, asking for Bitcoin, that maybe isn't really even doing it for money, but doing it for the thrill? You got to just check this off your box that this isn't that, because it could be that.
Does seem super random for something like this to happen so close in proximity, time-wise. And you said an hour and a half apart. I just want to be clear. Is this an hour and a half apart distance-wise or an hour and a half apart just time-wise in the crimes?
Distance-wise.
Distance-wise. So this happened an hour and a half away from where Nancy Guthrie was abducted from her home.
Correct.
And these two individuals drove about 6 hours to get to the first home invasion.
6.5 hours, right?
6.5 hours. And they were doing that because they were going to possibly share in the receipts of an over $60 million cryptocurrency ransom.
Well, according to reporting, they are saying that they were extorted by Red and 8. In other words, at some point, if you don't go through with this, then we're going to murder you.
Right.
Right. So at some point it turned to, but that's what they're saying. I mean, the FBI and whoever's involved in that case, and it will be done out of Scottsdale because that's where venue lies. But they're going to need to have real experts get in there and look at that Signal app and see what the communications were and see if there's any way to trace back to who Red and 8 are and exactly how they were contracted. I think these boys, I think they were 16 and 17, obviously sick, sadistic issues. I mean, but how did they come upon Red and 8? What were they initially promised? How did all this unfold? And so, in other words, could Porch Guy have answered the same ad? It's within the realm of possibility. Do I think it's possible as my Occam's razors, scenarios? No, but you got to check it out. The FBI is checking it out. I can promise you that.
Yeah. And I just want to be even more clear because I know some people who are listening aren't familiar with this crime that took place. So it's not really me asking this. It's mostly because I'm just imagining listening to this and being like, what just happened? So these two kids, 16 and 17 years old, they never met each other.
Never. Different high schools, didn't know each other.
Okay. And the two individuals or alleged individuals who they claim they were being extorted by, nicknamed on Signal Red, R-E-D, and 8, the number 8.
Correct.
Okay. So that for anybody who's listening who's like, I have no, like, this just went in a direction that they weren't expecting. It is absolutely necessary to keep looking into this. And everybody in like that area should be on some sort of like heightened alert.
Look, I said this with the Idaho 4 case. I don't know if you remember this, but Chief Fry came out right after the Idaho 4 case, and the question was asked, should the public be concerned? Is there any danger to the community? And he made probably the biggest mistake in his life that he definitely owns up to, but it's too late, right? He said, no, it's targeted, right? Anybody who is capable of slashing to death 4 students, your community is not safe until that person's caught. Anybody who is capable of breaking into a home of an 84-year-old, likely knowing they are not going to survive this attack and any length of time with health issues, and you are brazen enough and evil enough to take them. If I lived in that community, listen, if I were a snowbird, like many of these people are, right? We've heard they only live in this community. I would be heading back to Wisconsin right now until this is resolved. That's just how I roll. There's just no reason to take risks with somebody like this out on the loose. And I think they're in and around that area. I think they know it,
Right.
I don't think they're from New York coming over this. Could they be from Mexico? 100%. There's a lot of people that work and live and reside in Mexico, but they are able to come here at will for work visas and several other reasons, right? That they can easily get back and forth. So it would have to be somebody credentialed. Couldn't be somebody illegal that can go back and forth, but it could be somebody credentialed, and they could be residing there, and nobody that knows him could have any idea of what Porch Guy looks like.
It's just so interesting, this other case with these kids, how they never met each other and they're both claiming to be extorted. I really have so many follow-ups. I know we don't have answers to it yet, but I have so many follow-ups on how they had the same story or whether that's true or not. And I guess a bit more appropriate question for you is, how could that possibly be tracked if they were being extorted by these anonymous people over Signal or deep web or dark web or something like that?
Well, if it's over Signal, they can get records on Signal. People think that there's just no records on Signal, and that's just not true. It's kind of like when you do genetic genealogy and they promise you they can't turn over all your information until they get a federal search warrant, and then they turn it all over. So the same thing holds true with Signal. They're going to have to be forced to do it, but I believe that there will be some Signal possibilities to track from that avenue. Also, the money. They were sent $1,000 seed money to do all this. So how did it come through? Did it come through a bank account? Did it come through a Western Union? All of that is going to be able to be traced, unless it's a paper bag that's at a location, and even that's going to be able to be traced. I would just start looking at the cameras and interviewing people that live and work around that area. Did you notice some guy dropping a bag with $1,000 in it? I doubt if that's how it was done, but my point is that you can't do anything completely secretly without somebody knowing. Although people watching this podcast and YouTube show are saying, wait a minute, Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 6+ weeks. It looks like people can do things without being caught. It's a matter of time. It's just going to take time. This isn't going to be a quickie.
Okay, I've asked this question to a number of guests, and Tim and I have gone back and forth about just like what to do in this situation. And this is more like a hypothetical, because I can't get this out of my mind that the pacemaker is some key to figuring out her whereabouts. And regardless of whether or not this is like possible for the particular kind of pacemaker that she had. If a pacemaker stops recording evidence of a heartbeat, if the heartbeat stops, that information is sent somewhere. So regardless of whether or not her pacemaker was able to do that, if that information is communicated to law enforcement, how does law enforcement handle information coming to them that the person who's abducted has a pacemaker and that pacemaker no longer is recording a heartbeat? Do they go to the media with that? Do they go to the family with that? Like, how do they handle that information?
Okay, I'll preface this by I am not a pacemaker manufacturer. I have somebody very close to me with a pacemaker. But my understanding is if there's no Wi-Fi signal for it to pick up on, there is no way for it to communicate. In other words, I don't know how that's going to be communicated because the signal isn't just going from the pacemaker to dozens of miles away to some doctor's office that's recording that. It's my understanding that you have to have frequency to do that. Now, pacemakers operate off Bluetooth. Bluetooth, though, is the same frequency as Wi-Fi. So there's the same frequency involved. Obviously, the Bureau was hoping that they could use the signal sniffer to get low enough that possibly if the pacemaker was emitting still a signal that it could be picked up. So that, to me, answers that question. There's no way for anyone to know unless via the frequency is picked up by something that can be close enough to it to pick it up. So we know that it didn't go anywhere and there's no way to find it other than like the sniffing device. The problem is, I don't think even in a helicopter, the sniffer could ever get close enough to find her.
I don't know why I can't get this out of my head. So they were smart enough to disconnect the pacemaker from her app, right? On her.
No, so how it works is distance. So from about 6 to 12 inches, that's why it's on your watch, on your arm. So she took that watch off because you are not supposed to wear your Apple Watch at night. So she kept it on the nightstand. Once it got too far away for that signal, that Bluetooth signal to find the watch, that's when the disconnect. Now it can actually work through walls and it can work up to several feet. I think she could be in another room before it would disconnect. But certainly once she was outside and you have those brick walls there would be no way. The distance and the brick wall would get in the way of a transmission. That's my understanding about the Bluetooth from the pacemaker.
Oh.
But obviously you were thinking, Lance, like the Bureau was, hey, let's get a sniffer close enough to it and see if we can get lucky. It was a shot in the dark. And when I see these sorts of things done by the Bureau, that's when I know they have no clue. And not to be mean, it's just, I know that they are throwing up Hail Mary balls.
Yeah, that's when the Bureau's thinking like a podcaster, which is not a good thing.
No.
Well, yeah. So they didn't technically disconnect it. It just got disconnected because it wasn't like she wasn't close enough to her watch.
Correct. The frequency.
Okay.
Too far away for the watch to pick it up. And so too far away for that watch to then transmit to her doctor's office or to anything.
Yeah.
After that disconnect happened.
So do you think, and this is another opinion, do you think that she let them know that she had a pacemaker?
I think they would know that.
Yeah.
I think that these people likely knew that. Because of that, I think, and you know, it's hate to get this dark or to go there, but if sadly she passed, I think they would make sure that pacemaker would not be any clue to her whereabouts. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Now, Jen, I've just got one final question here today for you. And when this story first broke, we first spoke about it between me and Lance, and we said that the longer this goes without being solved, we feel like maybe ransom or money wasn't the goal here. And now we sit here almost 2 months later, and there's no clear known ransom. What are your thoughts on a possible Epstein connection here with Nancy? And as we've said on these shows, we know that Savannah interviewed Virginia Giuffre in the past. So just wanted to get your feelings on that topic.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first heard about this case, actually, News Nation had reached out and they said, we need you for tonight, but we're probably not going to need you for tonight because I'm sure Nancy Guthrie wandered off and they're going to find her, right? That was the initial thought, like, within 1 second of receiving the news. And so, of course, whenever I get a call like that, I'm deep diving. I want to learn everything I can about a case before I go on. And I was like, oh my God, no. This is going to be way worse. This is not going to be wandering to the woods or anything like that. So one of the things in my very first posts I wrote, if you look, P.S., she was very involved with interviewing multiple Epstein victims, meaning Savannah, and very much an advocate for exposing Epstein in the files. And then I also said, where's the effect? Isn't it crazy that this all happened right when these Epstein files are at the #1 story in the United States and maybe even worldwide when it comes to true crime? It literally, I was in it. Everybody was all over this. You didn't even have to be a true crimer. You had anybody and everybody from all realms boiling at the Epstein situation. And guess what happened when Nancy Guthrie went missing? Bzzzt. Epstein he's so much of an afterthought, you can't find any news on it now. Of course, then the war happened and so that superseded that. So I always say in this case, I think two things can be true at once. And there's some conspiracy theorists that are always going to believe this was to shut up the whole Epstein and, Trump's behind it. And this is all orchestrated and she's really not even gone. I was just reading that today. It's all a big hoax. There are some conspiracy theorists that are just going to run with that. I don't believe that, but I think 100% that but for this case, we would be talking right now, you and I, about Epstein.